month. We reach a level like it's like zero. When you talk about 15 or 10 or 100 maximum per day, it wasn't really an issue. But now numbers, giving the population size in Jordan and the size of the country, when it is like 2,500 or 3,000, it is alarming to an extent. Now it's one day. How much that would really be effective?
I know, that is interesting. One day. Well, we have a school holiday starting today. I'm here in Arizona, and they have rodeo holiday. It's a weird traditional holiday where they have this big rodeo that comes to town, and they're not going to be doing the rodeo, but the kids still get 2 days off from school. So, but they've been home from school anyway. But they don't have to be remote. So
yeah, no, they started schools here like 2 weeks ago, and still going on. My little kid is attending physically. She's third grade. The bigger ones are doing it home, remotely, online. But it seems they are moving into online for the coming period.
It hasn't been good. My oldest has adjusted relatively well to online, but my younger is just terrible virtual. There's no discipline. He's 12, but it's just, you think just a lot of kids who don't even have the resources or parents are not around. It's a disaster. So
it requires a lot of making the right balance. All the techs they need, the difficulties they might face, and not necessarily the remote one or the online is really giving the right things or doing it in the right way or presenting it in the right way. So, they are facing some difficulties. So you have to be there most of the time, supporting them.
Well, I mean, related to what you're actually doing there, you're with BirdLife, and are you a serious bird watcher though? Are you a big time into birding?
Not a twitcher in that sense. Serious one, if you want to call it. But I do a lot of bird watching whenever possible. Being stuck a lot into the managerial and office work. But whenever there is a chance to go out to have some pictures, I would appreciate it. I would love it, actually.
At least here, I'm sure it's the same anywhere in the world, but you have people who like birds, and I love birds, but then you have a bird watcher, and they are just a different creature. They are just hardcore. What they will do to go get those birds on their bird list, they love the birds.
I don't have a bird list in that sense. No.
I have a good friend who's he's a wildlife biologist, but he's a very serious birder. And the really good birders can recognize birds just by their songs. He can recognize birds by there's even a sub language, like their chirps or chips or something like that. Not even their song. There's like a chirp, like a sub chirp, and he can ID birds a lot from just that sound. It's like,
yeah, incredible. Yeah.
Let me check in real quick. We're at the top of the hour. Let's see. I'm just want to see if we're about ready to go, because she's going to prompt me. Okay, so we're going to get started here, and I'll do my introduction. It'll just be a sort of a pause, but it'll be completely obvious when I'm introducing you. So I'll see you on the other side. Hey, Adapters, welcome back. Today our guest is Ibrahim Khader. Ibrahim has more than 25 years of national, regional, and international working experience in the areas of biodiversity conservation, resource mobilization, and network development. His expertise lies in working with civil societies and partnering with government agencies, mainly in Middle Eastern and North African countries. Ibrahim will talk about his organization, BirdLife International, and how they are focused on mainstreaming bird conservation into the energy sector. He says that renewable energy sector needs to be bird friendly to be environmentally sustainable. Ibrahim suggests bird conservation can be achieved through good governance and efforts from the energy sector at local and international levels. Hi, Ibrahim. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Doug. Thank you for inviting me for this episode.
Well, always love talking about birds, and I love the work that you're doing there. But a little bit of background information. So you're with Birds International, but where are you based?
Yeah, let me start by saying BirdLife International is a global partnership of civil society organizations active in more than 100 countries currently, with the aim of conserving birds and biodiversity in general. The partnership work is supported by regional and global secretariat, 6 regional offices, and a global secretariat based in Cambridge in the UK. The regional office for Middle East is based in Amman, Jordan, where I'm based now. And through our work, we work with partners, develop initiatives that can contribute to nature conservation and bird conservation in particular. We are using, probably people would ask why birds. We are using birds as our entry point, really, to conservation work, as they represent an early warning for us regarding changes in habitats within the country, in a site, or all over the world. BirdLife work is founded in 2 main things: is the rigorous science that is coming from the field, and the partnership, the civil societies that are able to do local action. And by this local action that can be transmitted at the national level, regional level, and can contribute even to international discussions and debates, and hence you can bring in global benefits to your local action in these important sites, or with important initiatives.
Okay, I think that's interesting that you're just using birds as a proxy to get some of these broader conservation outcomes, and that's a very good, the birds and their habitat needs and all that. That's just an interesting approach. And let's talk about birds in the energy sector, though. I think that's where we're going to drill down on some of the work that you're doing. And so what are some of the threats to birds from the energy sector more broadly?
Yeah, probably people would first think that historically birds been the biggest threat to birds in the region, at least, and probably in many parts of the world, is hunting. And it does continue to be in many parts of the Middle East. An emergent, I won't say now threat, but potential threat is renewables. BirdLife do promote renewable energy as a way to convert into greener economy and reduce emissions. But in the same time, if these are not planned in the proper way, they might have impact on birds. And why birds? Birds, because they are moving. Many of them when we talk about the Middle East, many of the bird species crossing the Middle East are migratory, migrating between breeding and wintering sites in the north and south, if you want to call it, twice a year. And many of them use a strategy that compete on air, like wind farms, for example. And if the wind farms are placed in a location
Ibrahim, I think I lost your your audio just a little bit.
Yeah.
There you are. You're back. You're back on. Yeah.
Seems by mistake I would be unmuted. So the development, like renewables, it's like any development, can have impacts if not certain safeguards are taken into consideration to conserve biodiversity, including birds. Why birds is specific in that sense, especially when you talk about wind farms, because they might look competing on the same resource. Using many of bird species, like for example, soaring birds, are dependent on thermals to migrate, and the best routes for migration are the best places where wind is intensity and velocity is good for wind farms development. That would probably be our entry point to work with governments, with developers, with even financial institutions who would funds really to these sort of investments, to have a proper safeguard, apply certain guidelines, and take important strategic assessments and environmental impact assessments to avoid and mitigate any potential threats for bird species and eventually for biodiversity in general.
So I'm curious too, you're recommending best practices for the development of renewable energy, and we're looking at solar and wind. There are obviously two very separate approaches. Is there anything that you can do, let's say with wind energy, that's already out there? Are there best practices to help with bird mortality with existing wind farms? Do you have those conversations?
Through our initiative that we already have in the region, one of them has started probably since 2009, targeting mainly soaring birds. That the work has been initiated by funding from the Global Environment Facility and the United Nations Development Program. And that first initiative was aiming into developing guidance documents for government, for developers and investors about the safeguards they need to take care into consideration. Sometimes you have to start early in the process, from the planning process. Yes, in Jordan, for example, it was a recent development. We had to work with already started business and investment in wind farms. Now that was a very exciting experience because it was the first in the country, and we managed through our partners and the government to have a good working relation that we shared, in addition even to the financial institutions who are supporting this work. We managed to agree on the guidelines and the process they would take to do their environmental impact assessment, and later on to make use of the recommendations on the mitigation measures that they can take once these farms are operational. And indeed, one of them started operation during the lifespan of the project, and the case that been worked with them has been awarded an international recognition prize, including appraising the whole process of working together to take birds' concerns seriously, because development in general we cannot say it's friendly. All developments would have an impact, but what we are trying to make this development is bird responsible, and indeed that was a success story that we had in Jordan, and actually we had another one also in Egypt, where another big developments for wind farms is happening. And I'm happy that we were there on the right time, because they've been starting at that time when the project started, and that was an opportunity for us to mainstream or advocate to include our considerations, our concerns into the planning and the operational part of their development.
So is it like a checklist? If let's say a wind farm goes through, they're working with you and they're partnering with you and hearing how that they could be more sensitive to, I guess, to bird conservation, Is there something like it's a certification that they can achieve that this wind farm, did all the right things, or you don't go so far as like, let's say a certification? It's just more about the strategic long-term development of a particular resource?
That's a good question. Currently, we are doing it from a strategic point of view to influence the development and really give them the opportunity or demonstrate that what they are doing is appreciated, and it does contribute to sustainable use of energy resources. Certification bit, actually, it's something we are considering, and whether it would be BirdLife or probably others. But it is something that we are seriously talking about, if this can be something we can promote, but we are not there yet on that particular one.
Well, you'd mentioned some of the threats associated with wind power in my own sort of understanding, the rotating blades and such. What about solar power? What is the impact on birds in regards to solar? I mean, they're not necessarily running into the solar panels or such, but what's the issue there?
Okay, when we talk about energy, both renewables and solar power, first is the location. Regardless what is as a location, we need to make sure that the decisions take into consideration the sensitivity of the location. The other one that is also between the two of them is electricity transmission. The generated electricity need to be transmitted, so you have to establish and connect it to the national grid. For example, you have to establish a network of transmission lines, and that's something, again, might have its impact on birds, resident or migrating, depending on the time. Actually, the power lines in general is another dimension to the energy issue, apart from wind farms and renewables, because power lines can, especially low and medium voltage ones, can have impacts. Are evidences that they can have impacts in terms of collision and electrocution for bird species. The sun solar energy, again, it's the flare, the heat that it's created around. So, but it's basically the location is a key, and the transmission of the electricity.
We had a big solar farm they were developing in California, and it was impacting habitat of a gopher tortoise, and so that was the damage that was doing for a particular species, at habitat destruction. But I was curious if there was unique challenges for birds. All right, so when you're working with these partners, and especially with the energy sector, you have some tools there. And can you tell us a little bit about the sensitivity mapping tool?
Yeah, the project I mentioned about the migratory soaring ones has really led the work on doing this groundbreaking tool that takes into consideration the information we have about birds, species, behavior, and migrations and seasonality changes, and the collision risk of these species. And then this is translated into defining a tool that can define sensitive areas from none or less sensitive areas. And this tool has been developed really to help financial institutions, developers, and the private sector to check on the location of their expected or planned investment for a wind farm or a solar energy. And they can see if their development is expected to be in a sensitive region, and hence there are additional work needs to be done before really going forward, to make sure that if there is impact, that these impacts needs to be mitigated later on. So that tool is helping many I would say stakeholders, the government, the private sector, investors, to really get a sense of where what would be the impact of or where their development would be and the impact associated with it. We started that in the beginning for the project countries in Middle East and in North Africa, but now BirdLife is taking this forward to cover most of the Mediterranean countries. There is effort is being done now to do for big parts of Africa as well, and we know countries who are adopting the approach to do their national sort of sensitivity map to guide the investments and the development in their own countries.
So I imagine the energy sector, they don't all just work together. They're not just some big group. You have fossil fuel companies, and what we were talking about here is renewable energy sector. Has the renewable energy sector been like willing partners, or have they, is there sort of standoffishness? Because not everyone in the energy sector might not necessarily want to partner as enthusiastically as other groups.
From the experience we had in Jordan, for example, and in Egypt as well, which again, the best practice there and the work demonstrated there has also gained an international recognition and prize for that. At first, it needs to have the dialogue with them. You need to work at different levels. First, you want to work with the financial institution. The financial institution would need to have their own safeguards to make sure that their development is birds responsible. Private sector would see the value now with all the experiences we had. Now they are seeing the value of working with government, working even with the NGOs. And now in Jordan, for example, they are happy to have their monitoring data, to have a depository that they can put their monitoring data about any casualties or incidences that would happen. And it's really, again, with the government, you need the support from the government, having all the legal frameworks that would enable you to apply the guidelines associated with the development. Creating that climate of trust and cooperation and openness, I think, has been good in Jordan as well as in Egypt. So you need different stakeholders to come together, really, to do it.
Well, speaking of stakeholders coming together, what is the CMS Energy Task Force? Isn't that an opportunity for everyone to come together and talk about these issues?
Again, this was created based on the successful cooperation that the project and the initiative, the National Initiative, have been working on. The task force includes members from the civil society, from the government, from the private sector, from financial institutions, and BirdLife is coordinating that task force. And this task force really work to advise and develop guidance, even more guidance for wind energy and solar energy development projects under the bigger umbrella of the Convention of Migratory Species, CMS. So it is becoming an important regulatory, I would say, platform for all these to come together, not necessarily from the same country. They are actually from different different countries as well.
Okay, so you have the task force. Who are some of the stakeholders? So I imagine you're there, BirdLife, but then you have some of the representatives from the energy sector. But who are some of the stakeholders that I guess maybe are kind of supporting the position that you're coming from?
Governments. I would need government, civil society organizations, and also the private sector, not necessarily only the developers themselves. And there are companies who are working with the developers, like in Jordan, monitoring companies, consultancy firms who are doing monitoring and support to development, plus representative from other important multi environmental agreements other agreements that have links with CMS.
Okay, part of what you're doing is consulting these energy companies. How's it been with COVID? Everything's done remotely. Are there sort of meetings that you're going outside of these task force? How are you actually kind of getting your work done in regards to everyone having to go? You're not traveling as much, obviously.
No. All companies have their own monitoring schemes that they have developed, again, based on the guidance provided or developed by the projects or by BirdLife and others. Under COVID, it's been difficult because even the currently is largely dependent on human resources, at least in Jordan. So there was a gap for a time being, but they have been able to continue at minimal capacity to really ensure, because the lockdown, for example, in March came in during the migration season, and it was appreciated that in Jordan at least, and I know in Egypt, some mobility has been given for few individuals from these private companies who are taking care of the monitoring of these operating wind farms to continue and do and report on any casualties or incidences. Luckily, there hasn't been really casualties that would be alarming happening during the lockdown. Now the situation is different. Now the mobility is there, so it's not really COVID per se impacting the monitoring process. But the challenging thing is, if you are still dependent largely on human resources, you need to build that capacity at the national to have the resources available. Some attempts in Egypt, for example, probably trying to use more technology like radars and others, so can monitor the migration. But you need the human base to be on site at the time of migration to monitor that.
Ibrahim, we're getting close to the end of the episode. I did get a question here from Community Room from Ken, and I think his question is, which regional countries do birds rely on the most while migrating? And I know you have your focus area, so maybe we just stay focused in your geographic zone, but what are some hotspot countries?
Well, it depends. Each country has its own uniqueness in terms of birds biodiversity. In the Middle East region in general is in the heart of the Afro-Euro-Asian flyway area, connecting 3 continents for birds, from breeding sites in the north to wintering sites in Africa. So in Jordan, out of, for example, 410 or 420 bird species recorded, 300 of them are migratory.
Wow.
So they can sometimes, there are areas that we, as work with our partners, we identify these areas. We call it important birds and biodiversity areas. And we have usually an updated list of these sites in most of the countries that we are working on. And we keep continuing asking for, keep monitoring and updating the information, so we are up to date on the data. So each country has, some of them has their own species, endemic species, or some biome restricted species that are only happening in some parts. But each country has its own uniqueness when it comes to birds.
Okay, and so if someone's watching this and they're interested in learning more on how you can engage with the energy sector, renewable energy sector, and especially when it comes to wildlife conservation, who would you recommend they reach out to? You? I mean, there's other people in your organization.
Well, they can reach us if somebody from any interest from the region, they can reach for us. They can go for BirdLife website, and we can guide them to the right person. It depends on the issue. I would recommend many people really, if you talk more about the projects, or you want to address more the scientific and the science behind the work of BirdLife. But we are happy they can, just get into BirdLife website and put their request or reach for me directly if it's something related to the Middle East in general.
Okay, I do have to ask, you'd mentioned that there's all these migratory species coming through Jordan, but you do have some native species, and I'm just curious, maybe we could look up, is there one or two species that you could tell us that are worth looking up, a favorite of yours?
Well, simply when you look now from my window in the morning, you would see the bulbul and you would see the blackbird.
Okay.
You would see the jay. So these are the everyday birds outside my window, plus the laughing dove.
And what's it? Laughing what?
Dove.
Laughing dove. Okay, I don't think I've heard that one. All right. Well, I'm going to look these up after this interview. I've never thought about what sort of native birds are in Jordan, so I want to check that out for sure. Well, I want to bring you. There's some more questions that are coming out of the community room, but I do want to close out the episode. And so, hang on. We're going to go into the just chatting section, but I'm going to close out this episode and really appreciate you coming on Simpatico and sharing the important work that you're doing.
Yep. Thank you very much, Doug. Again, I'm happy if there are any questions or if you can reach out for me.
Okay, we'll be right back, but just hold on just a sec. Okay, Ibrahim, we're back. We kind of close out the episode and just take you guys into this just chatting. I had another question from Ken, and he asked, is there a specific software product that you use to do this mapping work? So you have a preferred software that you're using?
Well, that's very technical. I need to really check, but I don't think we have developed a software for it. The IT people and the information team created the platform, and this is linked to BirdLife database. So it's extracting information from the database, and whenever you update the database, it automatically updates this tool. But it is not a software. But anyway, it is accessible on the website. You can just type in BirdLife sensitivity mapping, and you will just have it there. It might not cover the whole world, as I said. It's now mainly within the Mediterranean region.
Okay, let me see. Well, is it I guess a fire outside your window?
That's because they are doing a curfew at 9. So
interesting.
So that's a half 30 minutes remaining for the curfew.
Okay, I didn't think it was traditionally like a fire. What I'm just saying, unusual. Well, okay, there's the curfew.
No, sorry.
No, that's okay. It's okay. We expect some background noise.
I only issued that decision only yesterday.
No, it adds some flavor to the interview. Well, it's interesting because I follow windmill power to a lesser extent here in the United States, and the bird issue does come up quite frequently, but it doesn't seem as controversial maybe in some areas, especially when they put wind power out in the oceans and such. And I'm not sure how much that's playing in the Middle East. Are they looking at like putting wind generation in the oceans, or is it mainly just terrestrial based?
Currently, the ones we are aware of are only happening terrestrial. I'm not sure. There isn't enough studies that coastal ones are feasible. There haven't been really any tests or attempts for that, at least in the region or even in Africa. But I think the future is focusing really on the terrestrial ones, inland ones, rather than coastal ones. or
Well,
see?
in a lot of energy generation in the United States too is there are a lot of local decisions. So, are you going to build a windmill? It might be a farmer that wants to put some windmills, and they got to get local government permission. And so, like at the scale that you're working at, it just seems such more practical. You'd mentioned like some of the financial people that are involved with funding these projects. Well, you got to if you get those guys on board to help you influence the actual companies that build. That's great. There's just so many micro decisions in our energy sector that you kind of lose track of. Like collectively, is this renewable energy project really going to have a negative impact on bird populations? And we lose some of that. So I think your approach, hopefully, is much more comprehensive. If that makes sense.
The wind energy development in many of the countries is becoming again strategic. And there's a plan to increase this production in comparison to dependence on fossil fuel and conventional energy sources. Individual undertakings, no, there isn't as a person or individual can do it, but companies can do it if they can get the right permissions within the related ministries, because the ministry already identified the areas where the investors can come and establish wind farms if they wish to invest in that sector. So areas are already designated for that. So it becomes again negotiations with the government and negotiations with the local community, whether they would like to have such development in their neighborhood or not.
And I guess, individual here in the United States, a lot of private landowners. And so like in Texas, there's a lot of wind generation. And so an individual farm is not building the windmill, but the companies that do build them will come and pay them. Like, we'll pay you a monthly stipend if you let us build a dozen windmills on your 1,000 acres. And so at an individual level, they do get to participate, but they're not building it. But then I think you lose something. And like, are all those individual farmers working together to sort of say, what's the overall impact? And I don't know that. And that this task force, I hope something like that's happening around the world where everyone's kind of sharing that information.
Yeah, well, to a great extent, this is related to land tenure within the country.
Right.
And in Jordan, probably many parts of investment areas are probably public land. Some of them are private. When it is a private land, they go into again negotiations with the people, the owners, and whether they can accept to have it or not. And it did happen. They can lease the land for a number of years, and instead of leasing, probably they can get electricity and social services for it. But again, that arrangement can happen. But the most important thing when you select the location, you need, if that location doesn't really have an impact on birds or on biodiversity, that is now okay. If the local community is happy about it, then that's fine. But if it does have an impact, there's now a conflict that we need to to manage between local community, private sector, and nature.
Well, Ibrahim, this has been a fascinating discussion. You guys are doing some amazing work. So this episode hopefully will be ready for you in the next few days. It just be, it'll be edited for you and everything. But we really appreciate you come on Simpatico. And if there's other areas that you want to talk about, or if you think colleagues have some messages to share, we want Simpatico to be a platform for that. But thanks for your time. I know it's a little bit later there, and you're inside for the curfew, so you're fine anyway. But not the curfew. It's a lockdown. It's a lockdown. Lockdown, not curfew.
That's why I decided to do this from home.
Right. But thank you so much for coming on and sharing your message.
Thank you very much, Doug, for helping us also to spread the word. Eventually, if I have to say anything final, what we are doing really needs to be continuous, sustained. It's not, shouldn't be only dependent on projects. I'm looking forward for the opportunities that we can demonstrate that work needs to be supported, resources need to be mobilized to keep that good work to continue in the future as well.
Agreed.
And happy to discuss any future ideas, not necessarily myself, but also other colleagues from the region or from the rest of the Secretariat, or even partners within the BirdLife partnership.
Okay, well, we'll be in touch, get some ideas from you, who you think would be good ambassadors for this. Well, you have a great day. You can just sign out of Streamlabs, but I appreciate what you're doing. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Dad. Take
care.
How do I sign out?
There should be a Leave Studio button right at the bottom. Do you see that in the StreamYard?
Yeah, here it is. All right, Dad.
All right, take care.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye. Okay. Thanks to Ibrahim. Bird conservation work, I'd love to learn more, about that, because there's a lot of renewable energy projects coming in the pipeline, which is a good thing. And maybe even a conversation about the tension between the notion of we have to deal with climate change, and energy is a big part of that. And then, you look at how that's going to impact these things, and that's what they're in the thick of. So I'm sure a lot of different environmental groups, not necessarily all on the same page, and it'd be interesting to kind of explore that. So, all right, before I sign off, I just want to say we have Mike DiGiramalo, he's coming up at 5 p.m. Eastern, and One Up Action, empowering leaders to turn ideas into action. Going to be a fabulous conversation with Sarah Ritchie. And yeah, come back around for that and see what Mike is up to. But thanks for joining me, and we will see you later.